Hi, I'm Kathryn Jean Lopez from National Review and the National Review Institute. And Ericka Andersen is here with me. Ericka is an old friend, an excellent writer. And Ericka, can you point people right from the top to your Substack? And you're author of multiple books, including an upcoming one.
Yeah, definitely. So my Substack is just erickaandersen.substack.com. So
Enough.
if you see my spelling, the spelling of my name here on the Zoom screen, that is how you spell Ericka Andersen. So hopefully you can find it that way.
Yeah, CK, that's important.
Yes.
And you're the author of a number of books, one about returning women returning to the church,
Hmm.
another about some of the challenges in the world today for families,
Hmm.
and another upcoming about alcohol and
Yes.
women in particular, Christian women in particular.
Yeah, that's coming out in January, the next one, Freely Sober. So very excited about that. Doing all the things to prep for it. But it's interesting how all the books have sort of just they're not about the same thing, but they do kind of follow each other in some of the issues that are covered. So I love the way that God has kind of worked that out for me to just kind of keep on that path.
So I am new to understanding what Substack is, which I know
Oh,
other people are in the same boat. But one of the things I've noticed right off that you're doing with it, whether intentionally or not, I assume there's some intention in this. It is sort of like this ongoing writer's notebook. And so you're able to have this like continuing conversation. So it's not like you write an article and that's it. Then you can go revisit it. Or you're in the process of writing a book and you create a community around this, something a publisher loves for selling books. And so I enjoy how, I see you write an article in First Things and I read it and it's excellent. And then I see it pop in my inbox in a different iteration. Adding things to it if there's a news story. Anyway, I am learning from you about how Substack can be useful. And so thank you for that trailblazing effort.
Well, I would say that Substack is sort of like a writer's paradise. It's definitely a lot of writers on there, but I love Substack because it's a place that people go for long form content. So in a world of 10-second TikToks, when I go to Substack, like I will click on something that's, I don't know, over 1,000 words and actually read it. And people come to Substack knowing that that's what they're there for. So I definitely think there's a depth, which is really interesting. And when it comes to writing articles, say for First Things or wherever, it's like, if you're a writer, you know that you can't get everything you want in an edited piece in a publication. And there's always so much more I want to say, sort of, in a more casual voice almost. And so that's what I've been doing lately is taking pieces that I publish and then sort of expanding on them and making it more detailed and adding facts and figures and personal experiences that wouldn't really have made sense for the magazine. And so I do love that. And Substack is very all about like sort of making sure people are looped into the past things you've written about it. So it's a kind of a circular, like bringing you in and keeping you on the platform and making you want to come back for more. So I really, really love reading it myself as a writer.
One of my earliest issues as a writer was when given the opportunity to write something for NR, for instance, because I started at NR super early, was I wanted to be the expert and write the authoritative piece on whatever it was. And so I would never write the piece because you're never going to write everything that needs to be said about,
Right. Yeah, you can't.
especially in 1,200 words, right? And so
Exactly.
to know that you can continuously talk about this topic and bring new light to it and whatnot would have maybe been liberating, or maybe it would have meant I would have never written an article. I don't know. But
Yeah, no, it can be very overwhelming. And I also coach writers, and that's one of the things that comes up is it's like, well, what about this and what about that? And I'm like, you have to kind of pick a lane sometimes and really focus on one major detail instead of trying to write like an encyclopedia, because you could do that about everything.
right. And I do have to say, and you didn't ask me to do this, but you have a particular gift, Ericka, I've noticed over the years, as somebody who's been an editor and watched a lot of authors along the way. um you seemed to have a knack for, all right, this piece I just wrote, that's perfect for the journal, or
Mm,
that's perfect, like because you publish in a diverse array of publications, and a
mhm,
lot of people don't have success doing that.
mhm.
And you seem to have a knack for, yeah, I know what they want. And so you would
Yeah.
be a good coach. I can
Well,
see
thank
how
you.
that's
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a learned thing and taken some years of experience and getting to know the whole world of editors and all of that, but definitely have gotten better at it over the years and feel very, very grateful to have published my words in lots of places and want to keep doing that. So,
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's exciting for me who's known you for a long time to see you, in different places. Christianity Today, maybe I expect you, and that, but then I'm like, oh, the journal, that's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, I've been very grateful for those opportunities with the journal lately. I have another one that's coming out soon, and that's just like what that just feels like a dream world to me. Like I can't believe that I have those opportunities. So I'm just very thankful for that.
Well, it's wonderful, and you're doing good work, like cultural contributions, into people's lives and souls, and so thank you for doing that. We're here today to talk about one of those contributions, which is you've done a lot of writing about in vitro fertilization, which is a very difficult topic to talk about, period. There's an added layer for you. It's deeply personal, as it is for anyone who has any kind of involvement in it. Um, I'm having uh, I'm like in a storage room, and so I had to decide what to do with my backdrop, and I decided this backdrop is a picture from the day that the oral arguments were held at the Supreme Court on the Dobbs case that ended Roe. And I thought, you know what? Actually, I'm going to put it there. At first, I didn't want to because this is such a deeply personal issue. But I kind of like the necessary contrast or reminder when we're debating stuff in politics. We are talking about, especially when we're talking about abortion or anything having to do with human life, we're dealing with the most personal issues, the most intimate issues. And in many cases, inadvertently, we are causing more pain. Often, the level of anger, the level of vitriol, the level of callousness sometimes is pouring salt in open wounds, and nobody's, intentionally doing that. But there we are. It's a reality, and so to bear that in mind, for people who write about these things. But in your case, Ericka, you've written for First Things, you've written for your Substack, you've written for a number of venues about your experience with IVF, which is important, period, for a human being, for our culture, for women. One of the things you talk about is the lack of real informed consent, real education. This is also a very hot button political issue. And I would also add, and I think you would add this too, unnecessarily so to some extent, because the Republicans, I mean, I just think this is just one massive unforced error,
Mm,
for the Trump administration and then the whole party to seem to go along with, oh, let's make IVF free. Okay, first of all, financially that doesn't make any sense, but scientifically that doesn't even make sense because it's not as successful as you act like it is, which is part of the lack of informed consent. You've got to have oodles of money to do this, which is the positive intent here is, okay, let's equalize it so more people have access, right? But giving more people access won't make it more successful. And
mm-mm,
so you wind up not only, wasting money for you fiscally conservative people, but also wrecking people's hearts even more. You're already suffering from infertility and you're giving people false hope, when there are natural alternatives, restorative medicine. My dear friend and former colleague Maddie Carnes just this weekend wrote for the
I
Free
saw that.
Press. Oh, her free press article about the birth of her daughter was just so
Yeah.
beautiful, and so grueling too. What she had to go through, and she just did a beautiful job weaving in the personal and the reporting on other circumstances as well. But so Ericka, what made you say, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write about this. And in particular, the thing that is so heart-wrenching to read about, never mind experience, is those monthly reminders about
Mm,
the embryos in storage that you've
yeah.
written so much about. So what made you start doing this, and what are you learning along the way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean the reason that I decided to speak out about my experience is because I I couldn't have known or understood like the heartbreak that comes with the experience of having like embryos that are frozen that you cannot use, and having then to realize what comes next for them. Because as a pro-life person my whole life, there's no other option for me besides like, well, I have to give them a chance at life, and I want to, I don't, but when I began IVF, 11 years ago, 10 years ago, um, though I knew a little bit about how things worked and I understood there could be leftover embryos, I nobody ever had a conversation with me about like what happens at the end if there are extra embryos. And nor told me, oh, well, you could end up with as many as 20. I don't have 20, but like you could end up with extra, that many extra. You're so concerned at that moment of infertility that you just want it to work, that you're not really thinking, what if it works too well?
Right.
You're not thinking that at all. And for a lot of people, it doesn't work. And so you're just hoping that you're one of the lucky ones. And that's what I was thinking. And in the back of my mind, I wondered, well, could there be extra? But it was one of those thoughts that I kind of pushed away. I was like, well, I'll probably just have, 3 or 4, and then I'll use them all. And then, we'll be great. And I really pushed any other thoughts out of my mind. And at the same time, I had absolutely no one asking me to think about these repercussions or what it might be like in the real world when I come to this moment. And so after I had my children and came to a point where we had these extra embryos, that was where I couldn't push it off any longer. And I thought to myself, maybe if someone had sat me down to have a conversation and said, I want you to think about the fact that if you have these extra embryos, that one day you will have to give them to another family. And so your own child that is the genetic sibling of your born children that may look just like them, you're going to have to give that child away. And even now I know even more about that. Like back then I even thought to myself things like, well, newborns that are adopted, like that's fine, like they have great family. Now I fully understand like the trauma separation of adoption even at birth, and like the identity issues. I have like gone so far deep into it now, but even just thinking about the reality, like put yourself there. No one ever had me do that. And when I came to that point, I was like, this is so much realer. This is the whole rest of my life. Like I'm making these like very deep eternal decisions. Well, I had already made them, not realizing really what I was doing at the time. But now I'm at the point where I have to actually take this action. And it is literally the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It's
Mm.
not going to go away once the decision is made, once the paperwork is filled out. Um, One day I will know like that this child has been born and that it's my child. And like I'm talking to you now, and I kind of am able to sometimes distance it from, like I can
Sure.
talk about it sort of removed, because if I really dig into it, I can't. I just like
Right.
kind of break down. So I'm kind of like removed in this conversation just out of necessity. But
Sure.
I've spent many, many tears on it. And I just thought I don't want any other mother to have to experience this, because it is so heartbreaking. Like to imagine, like, of course, I always say adoptive mothers, like somebody that has an unexpected pregnancy and can't raise their child and puts that child up for adoption, like that is a beautiful, wonderful, like decision that she's making for her child. But in these cases, this is a child that didn't ever have to be in this situation.
Right.
And what we're doing with IVF is we're creating orphans and we're creating brokenness in places where it never needed to exist.
Right.
And that's not okay.
Mhm.
Especially as Christians and as pro-lifers. These are individual children at the moment of conception. And my daughter, who's 7, she was frozen for 2 years before I
Mm.
was pregnant with her. And I'm just like, she was just one of those that were right there next to the others. And who are the others? And I don't know. And I'm at the point now where I'll soon be kind of moving forward with the process of embryo adoption, which is a beautiful, redemptive, and a miraculous opportunity and way to give life to these embryos. But it's not something like, I don't want people going into IVF being like, well, if we have extra, we'll just do embryo adoption,
Right.
because it's not a happy go lucky thing. It's a sad, devastating, heartbreaking, difficult situation that you don't want to be in. Trust me,
Right.
you don't want to be in this. I'm like, from now until I die, like, that's there on my heart. And whoever that, I pray that someday, that this will be, and I believe God redeems all things. And I think all children created through IVF were created in God's image, and in our, God has a purpose for their life, just like these others that I have.
And he knew
And
what you were going to choose, and
yes, and
yeah.
he knew, and I know that he hears these prayers, and we pray for them. And maybe one day, like, it will be like this joyous, light and wonderful thing that he's going to use, which he will use for his glory. But right now, it is like, I can't, I'm still not mentally there for when it actually happens, that one of these children is born. Like, it scares me. I just believe that he will give me what I need in the moment, because I won't have it myself. And but I know that I will now. I have to do the right thing. Like, I'm called to do the right thing. I can do nothing but the right thing, and I will. But I don't want anyone else to have to be in this situation, and that's why I speak out. There's so much lack of information.
Right. Yeah, you are really courageous. I don't want to make you cry. But you are really courageous to be writing and speaking about this in real time. But I mean, I think I know why you are. You say why you are, because you feel called to do it. And you also firmly believe that God will write straight with crooked lines, that God will use this. And one of the ways God will use it is by you accompanying people you don't even know, by sharing your story. And so, thank you for doing that. As you mentioned, I try to shine a light on adoption a bit, and to nudge pro-lifers, frankly, to care more about the children who are in foster care, who are already born. I think many people know that there are more couples who would be willing to adopt babies than we have babies. Another situation about kids in foster care. And so sometimes the left has something on us when they say you only care about the baby after it's born. Yeah, that's a lazy slander to some extent. But if we've got kids in foster care who are 12 years old and we're not adopting them, we got something to think about and talk about. But I say that because, as you say, adoption, even in the best of circumstances, is a trauma, is a separation. And so, yeah, to be going into IVF saying, well, but there's always embryo adoption. No, because that never had to happen, right? But as you say, it's not like the doctors are actively encouraging you to go through all the moral implications and practical implications. You're paying a monthly fee.
Mm-hmm.
There are practical considerations. The other practical consideration, and I think maybe a way that God is using all of this mess, human mess, moral mess, that IVF creates, is I think sometimes people think, especially with this is a whole nother conversation, but with Republicans talking about being pro-natalist and have more babies, and okay, but how are we having more babies? And IVF
Yeah, you can't,
one.
you've got to think about both sides of that coin. And I don't think Elon Musk is the best
That is not the approach we want to
this whole thing.
encourage. Yes. But the other thing is, I think we kind of give the impression when Republicans are saying have more babies. I say because I guess I agree with Republicans more than I do Democrats, but I don't even
Yeah.
know anymore. But, um, we give the impression that just having a baby is just like, oh, I'll just have a baby and raise a baby, and I have all the money that Elon Musk has, so it's not an issue.
Right.
No, obviously, I mean, because one easy answer someone could say to you is, well, Ericka just raised all those babies that are frozen. Well, that actually may not be financially possible. And
Right.
so that may be part of how God's using this. Like, yes, we want life, we encourage life, we're called to be to multiply, right? Be fruitful and multiply. But also, God gives us wisdom and prudence, and yeah, pro-lifers appreciate too that it's expensive to raise a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are real considerations too. And it's not a reason to tell people don't have babies, it's expensive. But I think it gives more credibility almost, because you can say, look, I understand. I understand so many of the challenges, and challenges
Mm-hmm.
that go beyond the specific having frozen embryos issue.
Yeah, and also, the whole I mean, I didn't touch on the Trump administration comment that you made, but I will. I just really want to know, like, who did that? Like, who is behind that? Because it's such a bad idea. Like you said, financially is like the least of it, but it is partly financial, but also, you know, I just think that those that are leading the charge on that have not thought this through. They're probably not truly pro-life, because if you were, you could not support that. Even though I know there's pushback, there are people that will say they're pro-life, and I just feel like there's like a cognitive dissonance there. If
Right.
you are pro-life and you're like gung-ho on IVF and creating all these frozen embryos, like that's not pro-life. It's just not. And so wait, where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So the other problem with it is, rather than finding the root cause of infertility, we bypass that and just go straight for the technology. Whereas, with NAPRO, like you were talking about, Madeline, NAPRO technology, natural methods to figuring this out, that's going to be healing for the long term, not just for the individual, but the more we learn about people that are suffering from infertility, the more we can help them in more natural ways that are, it's not just about the frozen embryos, it's also about the way it impacts the female body. Like,
Right.
there are ties to increased rates of cancer and all kinds of other issues when it comes down to what we're doing with IVF. I mean, when you're creating like all these eggs like at once with all these hormones, like that's not natural and that's not good for your body. So along with that, I know there's a big conversation now about birth control too, which is different, but at the same time, that is disrupting your body. And like, God created our bodies the way they're supposed to be. And so there is going to be, in many cases, a more natural solution. And you'll hear these stories of people who did IVF and then were naturally got pregnant later. And so, if I were to see someone that's like 25 doing IVF, I would be like, oh my gosh, like,
Ugh.
what are you doing? Like,
Oh,
you need to give this some time. You're 25. Like,
right.
and so I realize it's a lot more pressure when you say you got married at 39 and you're like, oh my gosh, time is ticking. There are different, every scenario is different, but because the range of options is not on the table, because people are not educated, informed about what's out there and available to them, or the like I said, like, we know the consequences. Like, I want to call out Americans United for Life just put out this awesome statement. They actually worked with a good friend of mine who is sort of in a, well, she's not in a similar situation to me in that she doesn't have leftover embryos, but she did do IVF, and she did it in a way that there would be no extra embryos, which is a whole other thing that nobody really talks about. Anyways, so they put this statement together about the informed consent piece, which is what I think has really been missing from this conversation, because that's really what resonates with me as someone who was in there in the office. I did not feel like I was informed. Like, I feel like I did something without fully understanding what I was doing, what could happen, what are the consequences, what are the risks. And the fertility clinics, and it's like I get messages occasionally from IVF doctors that don't like me.
Uh-huh.
um, and they, I don't think that they're all these money hungry, like, bad people. I don't think that. I think they really do probably love this work and really want to help people have babies. Like I don't think most of them are bad people by any means, but they do have a business, and it's not necessarily in their best interest to spend time going over all these issues and like having people give people second thoughts. And so maybe they look at it like, oh, you're an adult, you can make your own decisions, like whatever. It's kind of like people that don't want you to have an ultrasound in an abortion clinic,
Right.
required viewing. But at the same time, I'm like, but don't you get it? Like, when you make a different decision, and that's why it's called informed consent.
Right. Right.
So I think that's a piece of it that I really want to highlight, and we'll be talking about more as moving forward.
Well, two thoughts, one of them being informed consent. I can sometimes be a little Pollyannish, and I just really, really wish, I guess is the way to put it, that informed consent seems to be a ground on so many reproductive issues that people could unite on, whether they
Mm-hmm.
agree that those frozen embryos are life or not. And, both of us, obviously, we would say, we can tell from science it's human life, but I understand there are people who are not there, and there are many reasons culturally that they're not there, and personally that they're not there. And yes, so can we just all agree that a woman should know what she's getting into? And so you don't have to call them unborn life. You can call them frozen embryos, but there will be consequences beyond having a beautiful baby. Uh,
Yeah, because you'll see that these people that are not religious, not pro-life, whatever, I see them in the message boards. I've done research, and they're like, well, I don't know what to do. And that's why they get left there. Thousands and thousands are just left in the storage facilities. People stop paying their fees because they don't want to choose what to do. And so they just let
right.
it go. And they're like, I'm just going to walk away from this so I don't have to deal with understanding that I would be destroying my own children if I were to make that choice. And that is what happens with most people.
And culturally, we're putting people in this position because, like you said, so many of these couples who are going into, it's normally a couple, who are going into this are not adequately informed. The other thing is, you mentioned, among other things, contraception, a whole nother conversation. But increasingly, there are people who are not Catholic. I think everybody knows the Catholic Church is opposed to contraception, but increasingly it's for health reasons, it's for
Mm-hmm.
grain reasons that women are like, wait, why would I use a carcinogen? Uh,
Yeah.
why, and people, and I'm not making this case, I'm not a doctor, but there are questions about the increase in breast cancer and birth control, and let's at least talk about and explore, is there a connection, right? And I remember years ago, this is a classic example of me wanting to be an expert, so I never did it. But I wanted to write a book on the scandal of women's health, which is exactly what you were talking about. Doctors will rush people into IVF instead of being a healer, and try to figure out what's going on. And with birth control, I mentioned that or I latch onto that because so often, and everybody, I would wager to say, has a daughter or a sister or a wife, or you are the person yourself, the woman yourself, who a doctor said, oh, let's just put you on birth control. It'll regulate your cycle. It will do X, Y, and Z. Oh, and yeah, and every woman, every girl wants to be on birth control anyway. Well, no, not necessarily, but it's not solving the problem. It's masking, it's regulating, it's giving people, it's making for a happy consumer because she's walking out of the doctor's office with a potential, okay, well, my cycle will be regular now, or this, I won't have pimples now, or but that's not about healing. And even again, Maddie Carn's beautiful piece in the Free Press the other day, she talks about how at one point they went to a specialist um, to do surgery on her, to help make her womb more conducive to giving birth,
Mhm.
and really receiving life and nurturing it, and because she had already had one miscarriage. And the doctor was willing to do surgery, but the doctor said, "Oh, but let's put a bunch of embryos on reserve first in case it doesn't work." And she's like, no, that's not why we're here. We're here for healing. And oh, by the way, we're morally opposed to that.
Yeah.
But the medical, you mentioned the doctors, the medical culture is now so in deep, frankly, in the like John Paul II language, the culture of death, that I don't even think doctors realize what they're doing when they're saying something like that. And instead of the doctor saying, "Oh, okay, I appreciate that," he said, "Well, you're being very limiting."
Hmm.
Um, well, which I assume he has to say, because if the business now is outcomes and not healing, she's not going to get the outcome that he perceives she wants, which is a baby
Hmm.
necessarily, or he's not giving her as many foolproof options, or potentially foolproof options, as a good businessman would, you know.
Right, right. I mean, it's like just like any business, like they want to be like, we have a XX percentage success rate and like, this many babies born last year. And it's like the more embryos you create, the more likely it is that one of those is going to work, so to speak. And, a lot of doctors will say things, and this is what people will, this is something I hear is like, oh, well, then woman's natural, body like has all of these like chemical pregnancies that you don't even know happen, and they'll say this happens all the time and you don't even realize it's happening in your body, so it's no big deal. But it's like that is the natural process of life, like governed by
Right.
God. This is not the natural process of life governed by God. This is picking and choosing, and we haven't even touched on the fact that it ultimately comes down to eugenics, because you're picking the healthiest ones. And
Right.
people I know from the spaces that I'm in private communities online, that like when people have these embryos, they're like, oh, it's tested and it's this level and that level and this one's not very good, so I don't think it's going to work. And it's like, honestly, people have experiences with implanting like the lowest level embryos and them working. And then we're filtering out people with genetic issues and undesirable qualities and traits, and nobody looks at it that way. Like, I think people look at it as, oh, we're eliminating suffering, like we're not going to make this child suffer. And I fully empathize with that. If you are someone that has like a very awful genetic disease, like that's the hardest. But like, you have people that are filtering out Down syndrome and filtering out other like not non-severe things as well. So I mean, it's like how, and you see it, there was like a huge article in the New York Times recently about like basically these designer babies, like, oh, we'll make sure nobody's ever blind again and this and that. And it's
Right.
like, okay, but like, where does this end? I mean,
And
it's not
in
going anywhere
particular,
good.
there was an author talking about her own mother who
Yeah,
can read it
that's her.
out. What are we saying here?
Yeah, it's just the whole thing, like just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And we have to live like if you believe in God, you live according to a higher moral order than just like human desire. And 90 something like 90%, 95% of people do believe in God. And so it's like you have to step back and like look at decisions that we're making according to something that's bigger than ourselves. And this is clearly going beyond the scope of what God ever intended for human beings to do.
Well, both of us, at some point 1,000 years ago, worked at the Heritage Foundation, and I saw you made some comments online about Ed Fulner dying, which was the founder of Heritage and longtime president. And I mentioned him because he was Christian. He was an active Catholic, and he's famous for saying, personnel and policy and people are policy. And there's something about having a knowledge that you are created by God, that every person is created by God, that life is a gift, that like Bill Buckley always talked about, the founder of National Review, about the patrimony. Like there's all this stuff that's been given to us. chief among them life, and not anything we earned. And that just changes your perspective on life. And so there is, you mentioned people believe in God, but then what does that mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the conversation we don't have on a real super fundamental basis, because there are so many people. I remember Father Paul Scalia saying this in some context a few years ago, and I'd never really thought about that way. People don't think of themselves as creations. And if you don't think of
Mm.
yourself as a creation, that is going to change the whole way that you and we wind up in the position where there are, say, Christians or people of faith who are having a conversation that's like almost completely inaccessible to however many percentage of those people who say they believe in God, but haven't thought through, well, that means I have a creator who created me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, like let's using logic exactly, like if you think you're just some kind of divine accident, like it's very different than being like, wow, God, like I always say, like I'll say this to my kids, like God knew your name and who you were going to be, and that I was going to be your mom, like before the creation of the world. And so if you think about things like, wow, there's nothing that happens by accident, just the science of the earth's rotation and gravity and all of the things that make us able to live on this planet, like it all goes back to the fundamental. Everything is fundamental, I mean, when you think about it, because it's like there's a funny marketing, I don't know if I'm going to explain this right, but it like a funny marketing book or concept that goes back to, at the end of the day, the question is always, because we're going to die. And because it's like, well, why do you want to do that? Because I want to be with my family. Well, why do you want to do that? Because I love them and because time is short. And why do and so it's like, at the end of the day, you have to think about everything from start to finish, because if you don't, then like you're making decisions in the short term,
all right.
and you're making decisions without consulting God and without recognizing that like you're here for like 80 years, and like it's so much bigger than that and it's so much longer than that. And as in terms of God, it's like he's God, like we have to like respect the creator and respect his position. People, I mean, I'm not a big fan of like we should be super afraid of God, but like there is a reason in the Bible is like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Like we should fear the Lord, and that like he is the Lord. So this is taking a very faith-based turn, but I mean it is true. Like these are the big things that you have to think about, especially if you're in the business of creating life.
Well, and it gives you both a sense of responsibility and accountability, but also that hope, because you couldn't be going through the decisions you're going through right now about adoption of embryos without knowing. I mean, you could just get stuck in, you mentioned people see themselves as divine accidents.
Accident.
Some people see themselves as divine mistakes, or just mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
period. You A
Mm-hmm.
person could very well, come to the realization they have these frozen embryos. Oh my goodness, what did I do? And get stuck in that. But because of eternal life and God's wisdom and faith, the gift of faith, you have a sense that God is going to make sense of this. I can only, make the next
Yeah.
right step. I can only, go from here. But God will make sense of
Mm-hmm.
it. And so thanks be to God for that aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like that hope for this situation, but the hope for everyone. I mean, that is like really the gospel, in itself. Is just that like, thank God there's hope. Like when you think about, people that are in these tragic situations, someone that loses their child to drowning, and it's like, what is the point of anything when that kind of thing happens? But it's like there is hope beyond this world. And like for the embryos and my unborn children in this case, it's like if I was just living for me, like I wouldn't do that because it's so hard and so uncomfortable. And I don't want that to be something that's happening in the world.
Right.
But I live for a greater purpose and a greater hope. And, um, I think when we can live in that way, not patting myself on the back or anything like that. I mean, obviously I put myself in this situation at one point, but um, the people living for themselves is what sort of is the corruption of so many things. And I think we see that far and wide in the West right now.
Well, not to continue on this very faith-based approach, but yesterday in the Catholic Church was the feast day of Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene, of course, Jesus allows to see the morning after. And she's a great teller of the good news. And we're called to share the good news, not because and sometimes there's this caricature that Christians want to legislate their immorality and control women's bodies and all of these things, right? But no, it's because I can't imagine life without faith. Well, first of all, I believe it's true, right? But
Yeah.
also, I don't want anyone to have to live without this because my life could never ever make any sense if it weren't for eternity and the long view, the real long view. And so we want to share it. And I think in particular, when you were talking about, making these decisions for me, for, my circumstances, so often, polling shows us, research shows us that pregnant women, to talk about a different adoption issue, pregnant women who are abortion minded because they for one reason or another don't feel like they can raise this child, um the idea of adoption is worse than anything in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's because we confuse, culture just doesn't talk about, we don't talk about this enough. They confuse foster care with adoption. So they think that this child is immediately going to go into a foster care system and maybe stuck there for his entire life. But the other thing is this sense that I can't live knowing that my child is out there
Yes.
and I'm not raising him or her. Which is
Mm-hmm.
a reality you're dealing with, obviously, with embryo adoption. But again, it's that longer view. We're not living for ourselves. These children belong to God, before they belong to us. And as with adoption, um, there's this opportunity to share the life that has already been created, and to be a good steward of that, even if you're not going to be the one who's going to be able to wipe the tears and enjoy the smile and all the rest.
Yeah, sorry, my dog was barking.
No.
Yeah, no, I fully resonate in so many ways with moms that choose adoption. I do think, I think that's in my opinion, a harder situation, especially if you give birth and you hold that baby, like that's
Sure.
so much harder. I think it's a different kind of hard on this side of things. But that feeling that you just described of knowing that my child is in the world without me, like you hear moms describe like, your child is like your heart beating outside of your body. And that is how I feel about my children. Like I can't explain to you, I love them so much. And to imagine that one of them wouldn't be with me, I mean, that's the devastation right there, right there. And so that that is what stops people from doing it at the end of the day, I think. Embryo adoption and adoption. But when again, going back to when you can't unknow. And so
Right.
I know so much that I could never, ever choose anything other. And I know that, and trust that, God is going to be in that. And so, so much respect for people that are able to do that. And again, yeah, like you were saying about the foster care, that's one of the things that drives me crazy when you see in Facebook forums and the like, oh, then they're gonna have kids in foster care. And I'm like, do you understand? A healthy newborn baby is not going to foster care. Like those babies are going to be adopted immediately.
Right.
It's a
There
whole
are
different
waiting
it's
lists.
a whole different
Yes.
conversation. Which, I just think people that make that, they don't really care. I mean, they don't really know they don't really
They
have all the
haven't really
information.
thought about
They
the
haven't thought it through
implications
to
of
the end.
all
It's
of
like,
this.
wait a
Yeah.
second. And so, I mean, there are other arguments you could make about kids getting in foster care when they were born to mothers in poverty or abusive situations. And that's a different maybe conversation, but healthy newborns, like that's not happening. So anyway, there's just a lot. Again, there are so many different pieces to all of this that like you and we have thought through these things so comprehensively. And I think, this conversation and other things that I'm writing about and you're talking about is just an effort to help more people be fully informed so
Right.
that when they are talking about these things or making the decisions in their own life, that they have all the information they need to make the best choice that they can in that moment.
Um, I think it's important to point out too, as you started to, um, you have been blessed by something that IVF is something we're saying, gosh, there's so much that people don't know about. Um, and that having been said, you used it and you have beautiful children. And so I think it's important for people to appreciate, and I don't know how to shout this from the rooftops enough, because we're having a conversation about the morality and the practicality and the science of IVF does not mean we're judging you if you used IVF. It does not mean we're judging you if you were born through IVF, because increasingly,
Yeah.
we're talking to adults who were. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw a few hours ago that maybe this is an anniversary of Humanae Vitae, Paul VI, um, warning to the world that contraception would drastically change the relationship between men and women, and that there would be all these repercussions. And I bring it up because in the Catholic Church, we failed the world. There was so much opposition to Humanae Vitae. It turned out to be prophetic, and there are very often circumstances where priests don't want to talk about assisted reproduction, and IVF in particular, because they know that there are couples who have used it. That's not a reason not to talk about it. We can talk about all kinds of issues that implicate people's decisions, but in a non-judgmental way. We're doing this out of a love for human beings, a love for the truth, but a love for human beings first and foremost, both the mom, the dad who are involved in this decision, and the children, whether they be the unborn children or the children who are born with potentially confusions and
Yeah, don't forget and remember like to, I'm I have to tell my kids, and I haven't told them, and
right,
I need to do that. I'm going to do that soon because they're getting a little older. But like, how confusing is that going to be? That's not fair to them.
right, right, right,
I don't know how that's going to go. And that's another thing that you need to think about that you'll have to do because, hello, 23andMe, there's no hiding anymore.
right,
They're going to know. So you have to
right.
tell them. And like, there's so many reasons. And yeah, so like you're saying, I get sometimes like, well, you're a hypocrite or, um, what do you mean you have kids? So be quiet.
Right,
And
right.
I get that. I get people saying that. I'm very lucky to have my kids. It's like one of those things where it's like you're not going to take back your kids, but at the same time, like it's like someone that had an abortion, um, that's now pro-life. Like they're not a hypocrite. They're just somebody that has been like they've changed their mind. And that's
Right,
allowed. You're allowed to change your mind. And often those are the most powerful stories
right.
because they speak from experience. And
And deep wells of pain.
yes. And like I said, I this isn't like helping me. I mean, this isn't like, doing anything for me necessarily to talk about this. I
Oh, come
literally am
on,
like,
Ericka, you're writing for First Things. Oh, look at me. I have a
right.
monthly bill.
Well, and it's like in the process of all of this, I've learned so much. It's God has drawn me into this whole other side of understanding so much about creation in the body, that I never would have ever even thought of before. Like, and I think he's using that as well, to inform other people. But really, the whole reason is because I'm a mom and I know what it's like to love my kids, and I don't want anyone else to have to feel the heartbreak that I feel in making this decision. That's the gist of it. And also I care about like the issue at large because of this, but also like you don't want to be here. I just keep saying you don't want to be me in this situation, and there are other ways to go about it that may work, just as well. And exploring those options is really important.
And especially post Dobbs, after Roe versus Wade ended, there is this increased caricature narrative, however you want to put it, that pro-lifers just hate women, just want to control women, handmaid's tale all the way, right? But the fact of the matter is we actually want women to know what they're getting into, and what they're doing with their bodies and what their doctors aren't telling them. And again, not because your doctor is an evil doctor, because this is the reality of medicine today. This is the reality of the culture today. And it's we have the opportunity, because we have access to facts and testimony like yours, Ericka. Um, we have the ability to push back and give people information and empower people, especially women in this particular case. And so thank you so much, Ericka, for what you're doing, talking about this bravely. I think it takes courage to talk about something that's so active in your life. And but doing so because you want to help other people. And I hope you're getting some of that feedback of gratitude from people, as well as the complaints from doctors and others.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, definitely hearing some of that too.
yeah, sometimes I think some people call those like God winks, God
Uh-huh.
helping you, a little consolations to help
Yes, a little
confirm you're
encouragement.
on the right path here, as messy as it may seem and be. So thank you again, Ericka Andersen. You've written for First Things, you've written for the Journal, you've written for Christianity Today on this and other issues. You have a Substack. It's Ericka.
ErickaAndersen.substack.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram, Ericka_Andersen. And I link all my Substacks there. So,
And you have a website too, right?
yeah, ErickaAndersen.com.
Okay. CK, guys.
CK. CK. Yes.
Um, Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And I look forward to having future conversations with you about this and other things, including you're trying to get people to pre-order your book.
Yeah. Pre-order my book, Freely Sober. Not on this issue that we talked about today, but definitely related to women and some of the other struggles that they have. And so I would love that so much if you would pre-order that book.
Very helpful to an author to order books on Amazon. So thank you, Ericka. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for watching this. Please share it with others. This isn't a conversation that's had all that often. And I hope you agree. We're doing it with as much compassion and love as we can muster here, because people are suffering. And thanks as always to everyone who supports National Review and National Review Online.